It shows a degree of weakness in Putin that we've never seen before. Ukraine is attacking Russia where it hurts. This is turning into a technical war. At the moment, Ukraine is winning it. There's, of course, the fascinating question of the Kerch Bridge. There have been reports of further attempts on the Kerch Bridge. Of course, there have been several in the past already. It would be a big win for the Ukrainians to cut the new Kerch Bridge, although there is a land route, of course, so it's not completely existential. I think there have been some exterior factors putting off Ukraine in the past. One thing that Ukraine has got to worry about is alienating Trump. I mean, you could argue that President Trump is now Zelensky's biggest worry. The Europeans are beginning, gosh, they've taken a long time doing it, they're beginning to step up their support. The defeat of Orban was a big moment, and the 90 billion package of financial aid was approved. Now it just needs to be deployed. So we're seeing early signs of Europe getting its act together. I mean, Northern Europe has been doing very well for a long time, Finland, Poland, Scandinavia, and the Baltic states. But Southern Europe has been dragging its feet. And of course, Eastern Europe, we've worried about Hungary, we worry about Slovakia. We also incidentally worry a little bit about the Czech Republic and even Austria. So, you know, Eastern Europe is a bit of a worry, but the rest of Europe's coming along quite well. One area which isn't doing so well is Prime Minister Starmer saying that he would begin to take out some of the tankers of the shadow fleet. Now, there are 544 of these tankers, I think. France has already taken a couple of them, and the United States a couple. In the 2 months since he made that pledge, nothing has happened from the British side. And I fear that Starmer's reverse in the local elections might make him even more nervous about acting. I mean, I know there are various reasons that he can bring forward why he hasn't done it. I mean, the Navy is in a pretty poor state. There are legal worries, there are worries, the environmental worries. What if there was a leakage? And then there's the question of the costs. But still, Starmer made that pledge in front of the Joint Expeditionary Force in their meeting, I think, in Finland, and he hasn't delivered on it, and he needs to deliver on it. But Ukraine has got to worry about Trump most of all. Were Trump to totally withdraw his support for Ukraine, that would be a big blow. Now, I know they're not providing weapons anymore, but there are various enabling capabilities that the United States still provides. And so I think Zelensky's a bit cautious about doing things which might provoke Trump. And there's a question mark about whether taking out the Kerch Bridge might be one of those. So I think the jury's a little bit out on whether Zelensky still feels empowered to do the full range of things he thinks he needs to do. Incidentally, I actually doubt he would have hit the Red Square Parade. I think Zelensky would have thought that was too provocative and would have provoked Trump. So I think the whole question of managing Trump is probably number 1, 2, and 3 on Zelensky's worry list. Ukraine is attacking Russia where it hurts, and the policy since the beginning of April has been to hit its oil capabilities. That's where Ukraine feels it's detected Russia's weakness. Now, that, of course, is balanced against the fact that the closure of the Straits of Hormuz has increased the cost of oil. And the United States has actually relaxed some of the sanctions on countries buying Russian oil. So Russia's got a big win, a big financial win out of the Iran war. And to what extent that has been cancelled out by these very successful attacks on these 2 ports on the Baltic and the port on the Black Sea, it's very, very difficult to compute. But it's absolutely right. Going back to my earlier comment, if Zelensky feels constrained about doing things that are too provocative, that doesn't extend to hitting the oil. He certainly felt able to do that. Well, in many ways, it was a impressive parade. I mean, the marching was very good, the bands were very good, but of course, we've become used in Moscow to analyzing these parades. I mean, this goes right back to the days of the Cold War and so-called Kremlinology. We used to see who was standing in the stands, what was displayed, and so forth. And if you analyze this parade compared to most parades, I mean, last year is a bit unfair because that was the 80th anniversary, so that was a particularly big one. But the first, you notice various things. Firstly, a very motley collection of VIPs in the stand. I mean, there was someone from Laos, there was someone from Malaysia, there was Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but, a very poor turnout. And even Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia, who was actually in Moscow at the time, didn't turn up for the parade, very wisely, I think, now that he's lost his friend, Prime Minister Orban, of Hungary, who used to go. And then if you look at the parade itself, well, the thing obviously that stands out was the lack of equipment. Now, you could say, well, the equipment is needed in Ukraine. They've lost a huge amounts of equipment, so theoretically, you would be open to criticism for deploying it in Red Square rather than in the battle space. But I don't think that is the reason. I think the reason is that Putin was very worried about an embarrassment, that there would be a Ukrainian strike on the parade. And this, I think, is the most important thing about the whole thing, which is he made a rare mistake, Putin, here, because by going to President Trump and asking him to persuade Zelensky not to attack the parade, he really did show an extraordinary degree of weakness. And Prime Minister Zelensky put out a remarkably good press statement in which he said, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to permit the parade to go ahead without obstruction. So suddenly you have Ukraine permitting Russia to conduct a parade in Red Square. And that is a very, very bad look for Putin. And he walked into that one with sort of both eyes. So I think that is what my main takeaway from the parade. It shows a degree of weakness in Putin that we've never seen before. And actually, if you add that to a number of other odd things going on in Moscow, there was a blogger who made a criticism of Putin. There was a very well-known figure, actually called Remezlo, who made a criticism of Putin as well. You just begin to wonder whether Putin's sort of aura of omnipotence isn't just beginning to waver slightly. And of course, if you begin to see cracks in it, then things could come really rather quickly. And all of this comes down, of course, to the fundamental thing that after almost 5 years, he's failed to prevail in Ukraine. His three-day military operation has now gone on a long time. I'm always careful, by the way, on statistics. People say he's lost 1.3 million men. I go usually by the rubric that you divide by 2. So let's say it's 700,000. That is still a vast amount of people. And far, far more than they lost in Afghanistan, which of course brought down the former Soviet regime. So no, I think this is all a sign of quite bad news for Putin, and even sort of very eminent observers like Steve Rosenberg of the BBC, who've been in Moscow for a long time, are beginning to notice just slight, I mean, cracks would be too much, but just slight indications that all is not well with him. Ukraine endured its worst moment in the whole war last winter. It was a very, very cold winter, the coldest winter for many years. And Russia made a number of highly successful attacks on the energy infrastructure. And people living in Kyiv had a ghastly, really, really ghastly winter in their flats and so forth. But they got through it. I mean, I think in a way that was the worst moment in Ukraine's whole war since February 2022. But they got through it. And since then, yeah, Ukraine has started to make progress. Now, a number of things have worked very much to their advantage. Firstly, there was the whole Starlink episode, in which Ukraine managed to persuade Elon Musk's organization that all Starlinks in Russia and Ukraine must be registered. And so the unregistered ones suddenly went off air. And that gave Ukraine a very big advantage for quite some months. And of course, and they managed to spoof a number of the Russian Starlinks to actually register with Ukraine sites, which of course gave them the coordinates of the Starlink. So that was one very big win for Ukraine. A second one was, I mean, the war has spectacularly changed in many ways. Only a couple of years ago, I was writing for RUSI that Ukraine's big problem was it didn't have enough men, and men and women, of course. And that, ultimately Russia could win because it just had more people to throw into the so-called meat grinder. But what has changed really spectacularly in recent months is that Ukraine doesn't have people in the what they call the killing zone, the 40-kilometer wide front line. They've withdrawn people from there. They are basically just using drones. Now, of course, that means the advantage lies with the defender. Russia's in a very different position. It's trying to take the territory. So it's having to pour men into that killing zone. And they're being killed. No, the figure is being given 30 to 35,000 a month. Well, going by my rubric of halving it, that's 17 to 20,000 a month is still a huge number of people. And they're not replacing them at the same rate. And incidentally, the very smart, young, impressive, fit guys that you see on the parade marching in magnificent lines, beautifully drilled, these are not the people who are put into the meat grinder. It's very much people from second and third tier cities, and also from the Central Asian republics, from Afghanistan, and increasingly they're recruiting in Africa as well. And of course, there was the North Korean deployment, if you remember, last year. And interestingly, there was a North Korean unit at the parade, which performed very, very well. But the news out of Korea is they lost 2,500 killed out of a deployment of, I think it was about 11,000, which is a huge casualty toll. So suddenly we're now in a situation where whoever wins the war, it's not going to be a question of the number of people you can deploy in the front line. This is turning into a technical war. And at the moment, Ukraine is winning it. Now, I don't want to be too, clear about this, because Russia too has been developing technically. I guess on most technical developments, it's several months behind Ukraine. But at the moment, Ukraine has an advantage, and it's showing. And it's not just drones, incidentally. I mean, over the last few months, these FP missiles, these long-range missiles, these have been flying over 1,000 kilometers to hit their targets. So this, in a sense, if you remember the story, Storm Shadow was deployed. Britain and France allowed Storm Shadow to be deployed. Germany didn't really allow Taurus to be deployed. And the United States put all sorts of limitations on the use of ATACMS missiles. So what has Ukraine done? It's gone and developed its own. And these are remarkable. Some call them the Flamingo. The FP range of long-range missiles have been performing extremely well. So yeah, the balance has tipped in favor of Ukraine, and this, I think, is just another of the pressures on Putin. He's got to demonstrate to people in Moscow why it's worth continuing the war, and that they are going to ultimately win. And he said, didn't he, at the parade? He said, drawing a comparison with victory in the Great Patriotic War, he said, we are going to win. But I think the skepticism in Russia, incidentally, the war hasn't impinged hugely on Russia, except for except for prices, of course. But most recently, the cutting off of the internet and the Telegram channel has caused a lot of criticism in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So that's another sort of source of criticism that's going. So look, we mustn't catastrophize this. This isn't necessarily the beginning of the end. But if Ukraine suffered its worst moment over the winter, I think Russia is suffering its worst moment just about now. This, of course, brings us to the whole question about, what happens next. So I think we're in for a summer of Ukraine making good progress and a summer of Putin being under greater pressure. Now, this brings along with it some problems. Firstly, I think we will probably have more attempts by President Trump to seek some sort of agreement. Of course, at the moment, in Trump's priority list, this is now second after Iran. He's got to try and sort out Iran first. And incidentally, there's no sign of that ending anytime soon. So that buys Zelensky a bit of time. I think what he would worry about is being put in a position in which he has to accept some sort of deal, which is doesn't really help him. He's in no. I mean, at the moment, he wouldn't have any notion that he should give up any part of the Donbass, given that he thinks Ukraine ultimately is winning at the moment. I think the real concern is, so what happens if Putin decides that he needs to do something different? I know, for a long time, he's been considering again another attack from the north, from Belarus, although I get the feeling that Lukashenko is not keen to allow Belarus territory to be used for that purpose. So what other things might Putin turn to? And I think, if when I'm looking at my worry list, it's that a desperate Putin might start to do desperate things. And I think in the sense that would be the biggest concern. I mean, it's a long time. It's 3 years, I guess, 2 to 3 years since he used the N word, the idea of using a nuclear weapon. I'm not saying that's necessarily the tool he will reach for first, but I think a desperate Putin would be a dangerous Putin. And I think we all need to worry about that. And incidentally, were it ever to happen that Putin loses power, and I'm not predicting that, by the way, because I think it's an impossible thing to predict. It's not going to be for a nice, cuddly liberal who wants to withdraw from Ukraine and patch it up with Zelensky. It's going to be somebody from the sort of security apparatus, the FSB, who's probably going to be more tough than Putin has been. So, I think we all need to be very careful what we wish for. As I said earlier, Trump is Putin's biggest hope. Now, that's very difficult for Putin because Trump will not be particularly pleased at reports that Putin has been helping the Iranians. And Putin also, of course, has interests in the Western Hemisphere, notably Venezuela and Cuba. So if he's to win over Trump's complete support, I think he'd have to give up Iran and Cuba in favor of bringing Trump in to, as Putin might see it, enforce a helpful solution to the Ukraine crisis. And then that would, of course, bring the whole question of, well, what does Europe do then? Has Europe now become sufficiently robust to stand up for Ukraine against potential blandishments from Trump? I'm not quite sure we're there yet. We're nearly there. Very interesting, incidentally, to see Friedrich Merz's criticism of Trump. And Trump's immediate reaction is, okay, we will withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany. So, there's that whole question of that tension between the US and Europe, and which, of course, brings in its wake the whole future of NATO. Of course, Putin has recently suggested Gerhard Schroeder as a possible intermediary between him and Ukraine. I mean, this is a suggestion which is beyond the absurd, of course, because Gerhard Schroeder, the former Chancellor of Germany between 1998 and 2005, has focused his business activities on Russia ever since, and has had a string of directorships, I think, with some of the big oil and gas companies, and certainly was involved in Nord Stream 2 and so forth. So I don't think anybody in their right mind would regard Gerhard Schroeder as an intermediary. But of course, the interesting thing is, here is Putin suggesting that he's open to an intermediary. So it could not, therefore, be on the wit of man for somebody to think of an intermediary who would be acceptable to both Zelensky and Putin. So that's a very interesting opening, actually, which I hope the international community might be able to explore.